YM2K, dude.
Right,
that's right.
December 1999. Do I want to spend the last minutes of my life playing as a guy who looks like he's about to die? No, I'm trying to turn my mind off of that. Let's go.
That's a good point. We are joined today by Max Derrett, fellow YouTuber, video essayist, philosopher, and alchemist.
Hey.
Welcome to the show, Max. How are you?
I'm quite good, Mike. Good to meet you finally. Good to meet you, Kason. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, you know, we've been talking about having you on here for quite a while. We were trying to find the right game. We ended up landing on Planescape, but I think there was actually something else that we were thinking about doing, but that was going to be down the line more. But anyway, I think it was going to be Metal Gear Solid 2,
Metal Gear.
Because you did a video on that as well. That's very, very popular. But your Planescape videos are also excellent. So if you have not seen Max Derrett's channel or his Planescape videos or his Metal Gear Solid 2 or Silent Hill 2, since we've done that.
Or any of the other videos we've done on a whole bunch of them.
Go check it out. You want to give us our audience, who probably all know you very well for the most part, a quick brief on what you do over there?
Yeah. So I, like you guys, I tried to do more academic seems like too strong a word, but more like material, or try to figure out like sort of the author's intent and try to withdraw these where, referencing what you just said about alchemy, there's a lot of references to old alchemical ideas, which reveal secrets about the story. And then I apply that to other games and people seem to enjoy it. So, yeah.
Yeah, I do, for sure.
Me too.
Great stuff. I mean, we've covered Nier, you've covered Nier. I mean, a lot of the same. There's a lot of crossover on as far as games we've covered and things like that. So if you like our stuff, you will definitely like Max's stuff. Go check it out. So this is going to be our dev history episode for Planescape Torment. And Kason informed me on the way over here, there's like a 5-hour video on YouTube.
Oh my gosh, there is. Everybody should watch this. This is wonderful. So there's a YouTube channel called Mr. Edders123 who did a massive, and I mean massive, Planescape Torment analysis retrospective. And it is huge, it is long, and about the first hour 40 or so is just dev history. It is the most intensive dev history I've ever seen about any one game from somebody on YouTube before. So it's wonderful, and people should check it out. It's very comprehensive. It kind of filled in all the gaps and all the questions that I had from my own research. It's very good. I don't even know where he got half the stuff he got. I'm like, this is like some special development materials here, and he was able to get his hands on it, like old logos and all that stuff. Yeah. So it's very, very well done.
Yeah, I wish I had known about that before we started. Because I certainly would have watched it. But it sounds great. And I'll probably be doing that now after we do this episode. So you've got tons of notes there from that.
Yeah,
so
lots of
I'm
good
glad
stuff.
we've at least got that on the docket covered to some degree.
Yeah.
But we wanted to shout out that channel just so you guys know that's where a lot of our stuff is coming from. Max.
Yeah.
What would you say is the most interesting tidbit that you dug up for dev history on this game? As far as, I guess, it relates to kind of the core of what we're looking to dissect here. Because I had been talking to someone from our Discord, one of our mods, who's a big fan of the game. And last week I was talking about, I really want to have Chris Avalon on, maybe to talk about some of the philosophy and things like that. And he, wanted to reach out to me and say, hey, the Planescape setting and all these factions existed before he came to write this game. So that's not like his stuff.
Yeah.
Whereas Ravel and the
characters,
the whole, all the characters for this game, but also, and the story for this game, but also that question of what can change the nature of a man kind of came from him. So anyway, as it relates to, kind of like what we're going to try to dig into philosophically, what would you say was the most interesting or maybe surprising element that you found in your research in the past for this game?
Just Chris Avalon's philosophy in the way that he approached trying to write this universe. He tried to, from what I understand, every trope that is sort of taken for granted as a part of the fantasy setting or any sort of fantasy or more specifically the Dungeons and Dragons universe, and then just do the exact opposite of that. And from that, try to make us reflect on, why are those tropes there in the first place? Maybe we can set new tropes. For example, like some of the things that he picked up on that are tropes are things like elves, dwarves, swords. He makes sure that Planescape doesn't have any of those. Typically, sorry?
I guess so. I didn't realize that.
Yeah. He also, like a lot of games in the Dungeons and Dragons universe will have succubi. He didn't like that. Like succubi that are very, like, what's the word? Lustful. He wanted to do the exact opposite of that with the character of, what's her name? Fall from Grace. And then just a whole bunch of other different tropes of the genre that I probably bring up if I just bring up my notes here. Yeah, rats, very common in fantasy games.
I think rats are always like the weakest enemy in RPGs, right?
That's right.
And so he wanted to make rats technically, if they join enough of them together, they're like the most powerful enemy in this game. So that's kind of fun.
That's right. Thank you very much. Yeah. So just that approach, I just found so refreshing playing Planescape after playing so many fantasy games growing up, like Elder Scrolls and Draken, and and it's so obvious when you read that interview, but now that, like, after reading it, it's like you gain a greater appreciation for what he was trying to do, and he did it so well.
Yeah, I think I even said this last week when we were talking in our episode 0 about how there are so many things in this game that feel like, oh, I don't think I ever would have even thought of the concept of this. This feels so original or unique, and it really came from that desire to flip like every trope he could think about in fantasy fiction on its head, and particularly in role-playing games like D&D. So rather than naming your character at the beginning of the game, this character is nameless. And you're trying to discover his past all through the game and figure it out. Whereas when you're setting up a D&D campaign, you come up with all the details of your character and write it on a sheet at the beginning, including like the alignment of the character, for instance. Whereas in this game, your alignment is decided by playing the game, interacting with the world, and coming against these sort of moral conundrums and deciding who you want to be. Your alignment is decided as you go.
That's very cool. It's actually, I think it's a very cool thing that as you're learning your name, as you're learning who you are, your alignment is kind of slowly becoming a part of that. But I wouldn't even say it's part of the future. I'd say it's who you always were. That he's discovering who he always was, but through the choices that you have him make throughout the game, right? So it's like, oh, what's my alignment? I don't know. Let me go find out. And then you play the game, and it's like, oh, I'm neutral, good. But I was from the beginning. I just didn't know it. And then also I'm finding out my name, my purpose, all this stuff. Well, it was there from the beginning. I just didn't know it. And so we're taking on like this. It's not like a typical Amnesia thing where it's like, oh, who am I? I don't know who I am. It's like, I don't know, like, even just like basic values or like where I am or any of that stuff. Like it's more in depth, I think, on a more philosophical level than like Jason Bourne or, something like that.
I've talked about this in the past, like the amnesia trope, an amnesiac protagonist is a very big thing just in fiction in general, but particularly in RPGs and JRPGs a lot. And I'm not a fan of that trope generally.
No.
But in relation to a lot of the conversations we've had on this channel about eternal life or immortality and what it means to die and things like that, the way that they use it here all ties into that. And that's why I think it really works for this game, despite the fact that generally I don't love that trope. Because usually it's just used so that we can create mysteries where this character should know this stuff, but like we'll make him an amnesiac and then we can build up to a mystery.
I didn't feel that throughout this play at all. In fact, I didn't even realize that this is the amnesia trope until later on. I'm like, oh, wait a second. They did this way better than any other game I've played.
So rather than it feeling like just a way to sort of like create or maybe manufacture some mystery,
Yeah.
it's actually totally central to the whole concept that they're exploring. And I really loved the way that they pulled that off.
Yeah. That makes it less of a trope and more of a central, like it's the heart.
Yeah.
It's not just a fringe like frosting, like it's the meat, you know?
Yeah, so I would say I agree with Max's pick there as being like that to me is, and maybe it wasn't even necessarily like, well, maybe it was, because I do remember reading in some of the design document for the game that's kind of what they were going for. They wanted to really flip what you expect from a fantasy world on its head. And I think that's why Planescape feels so different, even from other Infinity Engine, if that's the name of the engine, right? The Infinity Engine games with Baldur's Gate and...
was it Fallout or no?
I don't know if Fallout is developed in the same engine. Is it, Max? Do you know that?
I'm pretty sure it is.
Yeah.
What about System Shock or...
well, no, I think
was
System
that
Shock's a different thing.
Okay. No.
But anyway, even much more different than all of those games that were kind of designed in that same engine and along the same lines that were RPGs. Planescape feels unique even among those. And a lot of it, I think, is due to this like real serious attempt to be like, no, we're not going to have dwarves and elves. And no, we're not going to do this and that. We're going to, try to, in every way we can think of, like flip what you would expect from this trope on its head and do the opposite thing.
Yeah.
And it really works. It really works for this game.
It does. It does. I don't want it in all my games though, but it is, it is very fun to occasionally have something that flips the script.
Yeah.
Because this game's, I said it before, this game's gross.
You know, bringing that up, there was something
sometimes.
I had just read, because I was reading this interview. Well, I guess I lost it here, but I'll just summarize. He was kind of going over, Chris Avallone, was kind of going over in this interview some of the reasons why he thinks the game wasn't like a big hit like Baldur's Gate was. And one of them was that. Essentially,
he's
right.
Was
that it can get fatiguing, this world.
Oh my gosh, yes.
In terms
it's
of
not a world you want to imagine yourself a part of.
Yeah.
In any way.
No.
I want to imagine myself as far from that world as possible.
Yeah. Which is why I kind of brought up last week, like, is this really true neutral? Or anyway, I don't know if we've gotten a good answer from that. If anybody, put up a good argument for why that should be considered true neutral world. If you have one, like, hit me up. But
somebody did say something like the personal, neutral good isn't necessarily correspondent.
The universal.
Yeah, with the universe of good or of neutral. Yeah.
Okay, I could see where they come from on that. But yeah, he was going over that. He was going over how text heavy the game is, how it's just mostly reading, like a bunch of things that I think maybe the core fan base of Planescape Torment loved the most about it were some of the reasons he listed as it probably not being as successful as it was. But as you were saying on our way over here, I think they were purposefully trying to make this game be as different from anything anyone else was doing at the time.
Very different, and there's good from that, which is like, oh, it's different and new, but also like, what is this? It's too different and too new, and a lot of people would have had that reaction. Well,
you were also saying that they were staunch against a sequel.
Oh yes, these people. These are my favorite people. These game developers are so good. I forgive everything. Everything that I maybe don't love about this game, I forgive it as soon as I heard the sentence, the dev team did not want to make a sequel. I was like, yes, thank you. Oh, I love you so much. These are my kinds of people. These are my kinds of people. I think Chris Avallone actually wrote a few scenarios for potential sequels, but he ultimately sided with the dev team. And there's a line here at the very that I put. He felt like if they made a sequel, it would be like dragging a rake through the original story. And that's what sequels do, people. Just so that everyone knows. A sequel is dragging a rake through the original.
Yeah. I mean,
unless it was planned from the beginning, in which case I consider it all part of the same body of work.
There are some well, no, that's not even really, that's not really an example of the contrary. That was intended, it was intended from the beginning to be more. Yeah. Anyway, I think you're right. I think that there is a certain, when something is an unexpected hit,
Yeah.
that there all of a sudden becomes great interest in building a franchise out of this thing, right? But there was no substance to begin with to continue this thing.
And especially a story like this.
Yeah.
Like once you finish it out, how are you going to bring this character back again and do it again? Like the arc is played out and he's settled in a place.
Yeah.
If you throw him into a new world again and have this all play out again, it really undercuts the message of this game.
Oh, definitely. It's actually one of the things I'm most concerned about with the next Hellblade game, because I thought that was a perfect ending.
Yes.
Like literally tying the bow
came to,
on a perfect ending to that. Yeah. And then when I heard they're making a sequel, I was like, why? Like what? Where do you go from there? It sounds like you're going to say something, Max. Go for it.
Well, no, I wasn't, but I'm not going to lose all hope, because I thought the same thing for the Talos Principle 2, because the Talos Principle 1 ended on such a perfect note, but then Talos Principle 2 story ended up being better, in my opinion.
Whoa!
So it could go either way.
It could possibly go either way. But you're right, because a few episodes ago we did mention, hey, there's like a kernel and everything. Okay, fine. Sometimes the sequel is better than the original. Yeah. It's just rare. The Talos Principle is a game I've really wanted to play. It's got that Garden of Eden theme that I think is absolutely fascinating. But I haven't played it yet.
Dog, you're gonna love that game.
I think I would. I think I would, but I haven't yet.
Yeah. Another thing that I found was interesting was there were actually two other planes. So one thing that I guess I found interesting about the kind of whole dev cycle of this was that a lot of the games we cover, they were born from like a real passion for like the lead developer or director or producer of the game, where it's like, oh my gosh, I've had this story, and then like I was at Square and then I don't have the rights to that, so I'm going to like take it over here and sort of change it, but do the same thing with Xenosaga.
How specific?
Big passion projects. And this didn't really start that way. Like there wasn't anyone who was just like absolute at Interplay or whatever, or at I think, what is it, Black Isle Studio, which is like the developer who was like, oh, I just love the Planescape universe, let's do that. It was like, no, we have the license for these things, and let's do something with that. And they just kind of assigned it. So it's not necessarily something that started in the same way as a lot of the games that we cover that end up becoming these classics because of the passion of the developer behind it. It was kind of like a job that was assigned to them. However, Interplay also had two other Planescape games being made at the same time that weren't even really the same type of game.
Right.
There was one that was like a first person, more like King's Field type of thing. Or at least they were kind of trying to go in that vein. And another one that was a totally different thing. And then this, sort of classic isometric Baldur's Gate like. Yeah. And this is the one that ended up getting developed. But I hadn't read this, but you said that there's some speculation about what happened there.
We do know, this is wild, because for Planescape Torment, we actually know quite a bit about the development of this game. A lot of developer studios will keep a lot of this stuff quiet and won't really release artwork or maybe the original pitch or early versions of the script. But this game's different. This game, we have a ton of knowledge and insight into the developers. They gave tons of interviews. We have the original 47-page pitch document from Chris Avalon to his leaders, whatever you call them, the executives, and the decision makers, and how kind of this whole thing kind of got greenlit to begin with. And most games, we don't get that. We aren't so fortunate, we'll put it that way. However, we do not have a ton of insight into the executive team and in particular the publishers. In part, they went out of business pretty quick after this. Black Isle Studio only lasted a few years, and then what's the other one called?
I think they're still around, though, aren't
they? Is Interplay still around? Let me double check.
I think they rebranded or something like that, and there was like a lot of structural change inside the company. But they have had a lot of struggles for a lot of years.
You're right. It says that they're still around. Why did I think that they went out of business?
Well, I think that they kind of did in a sense, to where it was like they had a huge restructuring and rebranding kind of thing, and like changed directions, and a lot of people moved on. And
that makes sense. There was another one though, and it's the company that owned the old license for Dungeons and Dragons.
Yes,
TSR?
TSR. Yeah, they went under. Basically, they all had problems after this game came out. Everyone across the board.
Yeah.
But so we do get a little bit of info about the executives though.
Yeah.
And there's some speculation that they never wanted 3 Planescape games to begin with.
Sure.
They didn't want 3. Are you kidding me? They'd have to pay royalties on 3 separate games to TSR. No, thank you. They really probably just wanted 1 to begin with. But a lot of companies will do this. They'll kind of have the people compete a little bit, and they won't tell them, but it's like, hey, we got 3 things. Okay, the one that kind of emerges as the front runner, and then the others get axed. And it's like, hey, guys, now these developers go work on this one. That it's entirely possible that the executives only wanted 1 game to begin with. But in order to maintain the way that, I don't know, the enthusiasm for the projects, right, they kind of let people, work on 3 different games on their own. Now, this isn't entirely confirmed. This is speculation by the developers, by the way. But also, there's the guy, the producer who came from Germany, the guy who had made the...
Guido Henkel, I think his name
Henkel,
is.
yeah. He became known among all the developers as like the bad guy, the guy that they didn't, anytime he came over, it was like, oh, great, here he is. We're going to do some things that we don't want. And Guido Henkel has talked about this before. He said that like, look, they didn't like me by the end. And he actually left the project before the game was published. And he left the company too. He totally left. But he says, look, I was getting tons of pressure by the executive team. And the devs don't know that. They just know that I came down and flipped the tables and told them to do everything differently. But what they don't know is that behind the scenes, the executives were putting all kinds of pressure on me and this project. And that's so funny because Chris Avalon's perspective was that the executives were very hands-off.
I know.
Of the whole thing.
I was really interested to read
that. But Guido and Chris did not get along. They don't even... Seems in more recent interviews that they keep their distance from each other a little bit. They maybe don't work so well together. And so, but I feel like there's a little bit of some dissonance there in terms of were the executives involved or not, right? Chris says they weren't, but the producer says that they were, and that it turned him into a bad guy because he had to do all the producers' all the executives' biddings. So it's just really murky into looking into the publisher and the executives at Black Isle. But in terms of the developers, we have so much information, as we have assets and all this kind of stuff from the early days of this game, and it's really cool because it's very rare for a lot of games to have this much material on how it was made.
Yeah, I was really surprised that they actually had like the design document public for like people to be able to read.
Well,
I don't think I've ever encountered that.
Especially because some people will read it. It's not the most professional.
Yeah. Not at all.
Let's just it's not the most politically correct. It's not the most professional. It's not the most polite document that you've ever read. But it's public and it is what it is. This is how a very young Chris Avalon pitched the game to the executives. And I'm shocked reading it, really. It's kind of funny. But at the same time, he was kind of going for that. This game was supposed to be really, really edgy and really, in fact, this is another place where Guido kind of put his foot down. And apparently Chris wanted to make it even more gross than it already is, even more gory and just all this stuff, and Guido was saying, like, come on, man, this is too much. You're going way too far. And I would agree because I think the game as it is a little too far. So I can't imagine what it was going to be before.
Well, that's what I was most surprised as far as the tone of like how that document was written when I was reading it. I feel like Planescape is remembered as this like deeply profound and philosophical and important game.
But it didn't start.
But like, that's not the way they were writing this.
No.
They was talking about the violence and and it really was almost, it seemed to me reading it, I don't know for sure, but that the focus at the beginning was more about let's just be as different and edgy as we can.
As possible.
Not so much we're trying to like create some profound art with this.
Yeah.
And yet that's exactly what it became. And I think part of that
that's true.
Is the Planescape setting, which already existed, and the fact that all those factions are really well thought out.
Yeah, that's cool.
But even like I said, the whole ravel, what can change the nature of a man thing is what I think people think about when they think about Planescape. And
they don't think about Morse like ogling all the girls like every second of his life. Yeah.
Or like, well, I love what I love about that character is
I know.
He's actually like the most important member of the party, I think, in combat because he draws attention and he has high evasion, I guess. So like the litany of curses ability that he has that you can upgrade by having him listen to how other people swear and curse, and he upgrades his ability to like piss people off so he can drag all the aggro onto him.
Man. That's so funny.
That is more like what it felt like they were kind of wanting the tone of this game to be.
Yeah.
And it seems almost like maybe an emergent part of this became what we think of Planescape as now.
Yeah.
Now, again, I really wanted to have Chris on and to kind of ask him about some of these things, and maybe we'll get the chance to do that by the end. But I don't know. I thought it was fascinating. Well, maybe lightning in a bottle in a certain sense.
And that's what you would have missed with a sequel. Because with a sequel, they'd have said, whoa, people, we got to make it really philosophical and we got to really, that's what people liked about the first one. But the reason the first one came across so well is because they didn't belabor themselves, like throwing all that stuff in. I mean, to some degree they did. But in a lot of ways, it's like they weren't necessarily writing a game to be just that. But that's what the sequel would have become. And it probably would have been, it would not have been good. I would just say that. I'm going to go out on a limb. I agree with the developers. A sequel would not have been good.
Max, I think you had, I don't know if you pinged us earlier. Was there something you wanted to cut in on?
Yes, just a couple of things I think are worth mentioning. As far as the 3 Planescape games that were in development, one of them was by David Zeb Cook, and David, we'll just call him Zeb Cook because that's how he's known. He was the guy who created the original Planescape setting. Yeah. And strangely enough, his wasn't the one that was chosen. It was it was Chris Avalon's, obviously.
Right. But then he came over, right, and helped out.
Yes, that's right. And from what I understand, it was sort of supposed to be like a dungeon crawler, kind of like Elder Scrolls 2 Daggerfall, a little bit like that. But then it got evolved into this other project, which I can't remember the name of off the top of my head. But
it was like Stone something.
Stone Keep?
Yeah, that was it. Stone Keep, yeah.
Yeah, from what I understand, that project was in the works for like 5 years and had a whole bunch of money poured into it, but then it got canceled.
Yeah, exactly.
But anyways, back to Chris Avalon's. I'm kind of glad that that was the one that won out at the end, even though Colin McComb, the guy that was in charge of the other game, the one that was going to be like Kingsfield, sounded kind of cool. Chris Avalon's Last Rites proposal, which was the original name of Planescape before it became Planescape.
That's right. It was the hardest time settling on a name.
Yeah, Last Rites. Which I like, but
I do too.
Yeah, so Chris's idea of what Planescape would eventually be is closest in nature to what Planescape setting is in its essence. From what I understand, as somebody who hasn't really dabbled too much beyond Planescape in regard to the wider Dungeons and Dragons universe, what makes Planescape so unique compared to everything else is because it compels the people playing the tabletop game to engage in constant, rigorous philosophical discourse. And that carried over to the game perfectly.
I agree.
Perfectly. So, yeah, kind of glad that that won out in the end.
That's actually really interesting that you bring that up, because one of the questions in the interview I was reading to Chris was, how was it dealing with the pressure of trying to like capture the spirit of the Planescape universe or whatnot? And he sort of looked at it as being like it wasn't like that hard. And like based on like what we've talked about with franchises that get handed off from a creator to a different person to kind of take their own direction, whether that's Final Fantasy, whether that's Star Wars, whether that's whatever. It seems like it's actually a very difficult thing for a lot of people. We've talked about The Witcher a little bit too with the Netflix series, or like this is not people feel like maybe the creators who are trying to take a property from its original creator and do something with it are not maybe understanding what it was about its
from the beginning
internal nature or spirit that was what people loved about it. And Chris's response to that sounded like it wasn't that hard. You just kind of, make sure you understand it as well as you can, and then but
then you do it.
But that's exactly it, though. I mean, if the Planescape game setting is about engaging, kind of constantly in this sort of philosophical way with the world and with the characters, that is like the vast majority of what this game is. It's conversations and talking with people and making choices, not the combat and things that you would see more from a Baldur's Gate or something like that, where it's more combat focused. So it's really interesting that from, again, reading the design document, where it might have come across, again, just as an initial sort of read of it, like this doesn't seem to be aligned with that thing we're talking about, with the core of what Planescape's about.
Yeah.
This was more about, we're going to make this really crass and there'll be a lot of violence, it'll be really gross, but yet he did understand it extremely well, because the story he wrote involves mostly that kind of thing, just the discussions, the talking, the philosophical debates and outmaneuvering of characters and trying to convince them or persuade them or, dominate them or command or intimidate or whatever. It's all there. And they captured it perfectly. It surprised me a lot that was the result based on what I was reading in the initial design doc.
And if I may just add one other element to Chris Avalon's grandiosity, Mix or Mike's I'm not sure to pronounce your name, man, in the Discord chat is just bringing up that during the time that Planescape Torment was being worked on, Chris Avalon was also involved with working on Fallout 2.
Yes.
And he just talks about how he was so many just days working nonstop, just trying to make sure that these games got done. Plus, and just talking about being able to take on monumental tasks, like say, like it can be sometimes taking pre-existing worlds and writing with them. This man has worked on Knights of the Old Republic 2, in which he gave us the character Kreia, who is legendary. Worked on Alpha Protocol. He worked on Prey 2017. He worked on Fallout New Vegas, particularly the DLCs. The guy's nuts. He's one of the best writers, at least in the history of Western video games.
Wow.
And I would consider, Planescape probably his magnum opus.
Well, it's also worth saying at this point that the script for this game, the word script,
like the word count,
there you go. The word count is around 800,000 words, which is longer than War and Peace. It's almost as long as all the Harry Potter books combined. It's like it's a massive tome. And obviously, when it came down to the final output, he didn't write every single word. But he was the lead writer, and he wrote the scenario, and he wrote most of it, which is like just wild.
I mean, as somebody who has written I think mine is at 150,000 word manuscript.
How long did it take you to get there?
How difficult it was to get to that point. Writing 800,000 words plus, I mean, it takes prolific levels of writing, and especially to write that well.
Exactly, that's the thing. The execution on the writing is top level. It's so good. It's not just that I could write 800,000 words. A monkey could do that, but it's good, and there's no weak point. I don't find weak points in the writing. It all seems consistent, and it shares a voice. I couldn't tell one writer from another.
That's a really
good point. It all shares a voice, and like you mentioned before, that Chris Avalon seemed to really understand the Planescape kind of system, even though his game seemed to not make a ton of sense initially, but when you get down in deep, he does understand it. Well, the writers understood what he was doing as well, because they all seem to share the same kind of vision, and their writing is indistinguishable. And so it felt like it was a single author writing all of this.
That was I don't know if I should say surprising, because it's obvious when you think about it. Game design is a very collaborative process. I mean, there's a lot of people wearing a lot of different hats, and responsibilities getting passed from person to person.
This dev team was, I think, 30 people total.
I think a lot of times on these sort of legendary games, people sort of attach themselves to a specific like figurehead or face and be like, oh, this guy was such a genius and whatnot. But just as was true on, say, Final Fantasy VII, there was like tons, and 6 too, tons of different people writing scenarios for different characters in different places. And it's almost like a team of 5 or 6 writers, which is when I think about it, I mean, that almost seems like counterintuitive as a way to approach because of what you just said.
How do you all link up, you know?
Yeah, it's hard to get the voices to sound consistent for the characters when you have different people writing them.
Yeah.
Yet in this, I never, ever felt that way. It seemed perfectly consistent all the time. Yet there were so many different people working on the alley of dangerous angles, or on the brothel, or on this,
the brothel
that Chris was handing off almost begrudgingly at times because, I really wanted to write that part, but I can't do all of this and work on Fallout 2. You know, like he had to sort of, what's the word I'm looking for?
Divvy it up.
Yeah, divvy it up, but like share.
Yeah.
Share the load.
Share the load. Say it in slow-mo.
So, yeah, I mean, it's really quite remarkable how unified they must have been. And it sounds like maybe outside of the producer, Guido Henkel, they seemed to work really well together and get along.
And honestly, Guido, his role was just the way I see it, and I really feel for him. Maybe, who knows, maybe he was, the wrench and the problem, but it doesn't appear that way to me. He just had the difficult job. He took it all upon himself so that the other team could kind of cohere, and he just became the bad guy because there needs to be a bad guy. And that was him, and he just took it all, and then he left, and then the game is awesome. But who knows without him what this really would have been.
Sure. Yeah.
So I'm just throwing that out there. He has not done a ton of work since this
then.
game. Yeah.
Oh, so
he's done some things, but really not much.
Yeah, I mean, that kind of sucks when you think about it. I mean, I don't know if it's. Of course, we don't know the reasons for why that is. We haven't looked into it. But Chris Avellone goes on to have a really prolific career after this. I mean, he's been involved in many, many, many just legendary games.
Well, Henkel was the mastermind behind the Arcania, Realms of Arcania games that were released some years before this, and that's why they brought him here, because he had already been like really successful. But it seems like that was more or less where his career kind of peaked, and then So I just want to say that's unfortunate. Yeah, because you never have a thing where everybody gets along perfectly, and then the executives are there, and there's no middle guy who's just taking all the heat. That always happens.
So, in this documentary that you watched, did it go over like some of like the most challenging things that they had to kind of overcome or whatnot? I always find that some of the most interesting stuff to look into.
The engine in particular. So BioWare created this engine, and it was really unique in its time. It took a lot of programming. Well, what would you call it? It automated a lot of the programming so that people who weren't programmers could kind of click and drag and make a world without having to pass it to programmers first so that they could implement it, So any artist designing the assets could really go into the engine and have a pretty good game maker's toolkit where they can just kind of put things where they go and it works. That's how most games are made nowadays, of course. Now you need programmers still because engines are never exactly what you need. You always have to modify them. Every company does this. But this was early. This is in the 90s. Typically, programmers just programmed the game. The idea of creating an engine and then selling the engine and then just taking kind of royalties on the back end after the game is released. This is around the time where that really started. And of course, it's once you get into 3D, things got really complicated, especially for programmers. And engines became a must. You have to have an engine. So otherwise, you're going to need a billion programmers that are constantly, working. Probably what it took to create the engine in the first place. Yeah. And some game developers still opt to use their own engine. Fine, but it's at this point, it's almost a complete waste of resources. I don't know. Nintendo still does it, and good for them. Their games are great. But for the most part, the engine was given to them, but it was early. They kept updating. This is like early internet times, right? Yeah. They would update the engine, and then I guess they would have to get it on a floppy disk or so. I don't know how they got the update. Actually, I haven't looked into this enough. I don't think you could just download it from the internet. I'm pretty sure it was like they had to actually work, and they did have meetings where they showed off their game to like BioWare and stuff because they were considered minor stakeholders at the very least. And so it's like, oh, cool. And BioWare was actually embarrassed because their own game developers didn't look as good as Planescape Torment. And they're like, how come they're using our engine that looks sweet and we can't do that same thing with our games? Come on, what's going on? Like really upsetting for them. But Planescape Torment, their programmers were able to take advantage of the engine and then sneak in, kind of customize it on their own.
Sure.
But then when the updates for the engine came, it broke their patches. It broke their programming that they had done. And then in some ways they'd say, oh, we fixed it. You can do this now in engine. But the programmers are like, well, we already worked around that outside of the engine. And now our workaround doesn't work. So now we have to redo that part, you know? And so that kept happening over and over. In fact, there was one point, so this game got delayed several times. There were multiple delays here. Now, just a few months long. After the very first delay, I believe it was Chris himself who said, okay, there is nothing short of Armageddon that will cause another delay this time. Like, we only need one delay, and as long as things don't, as long as the world doesn't get destroyed, this game will be released on this new release date.
Yeah.
Well, it wasn't. And this is actually a bit of a funny story. So they claimed that the reason they couldn't make that release date was because, oh no, we deleted somehow we accidentally, or there was an error and we just lost all of our data for the entire game and we had to revert to a previous build of the game and then finish the game from there. Oh, but we need more time now. Sorry, man. And so it was December when the game actually was released. Well, according to some developers, that's not totally accurate. That's what he said. That's the way they sold it. But they kind of had to tiptoe around the fact that this game still isn't done, and I promised it would be done.
Yeah.
We need a good reason for why it's not done, other than an 800-page or an 800-word script or 800,000 word script. That's not good enough. You know, I need something. And so it's like, okay, well, apparently there was an error, and they did lose some work, but not as much as it was sold. Not that much work. They did lose some, and they were able to kind of, oh no, we need months more now. And it's like, okay, they may have oversold that a little bit. They may have taken advantage a little bit. But with the final product being what it is, nobody should ever be upset about that at all. This was totally fine. He couldn't make the second release date either, so they had to delay it again. And this is mostly the excuse for that. But that was one of the difficulties too. Their workarounds kept breaking, and it was very difficult for them to program this game.
I mean, and that's the thing. It's hard for me to describe this game as being a huge game because in certain ways it actually feels small. It's like a text adventure. But it's a very, very dense game. So there's a very small area in which it is just packed with so much there.
Yeah.
So in a certain sense, I look at this and feel like it's actually kind of a small game in terms of its scale.
Right.
But it's huge in terms of the amount of content in that small area. And I'm sure that we would do this all the time. I still do. You underestimate how long something will really take to do.
Yes.
I mean, every time someone asks me, okay, when can you have this project done? How long do you think that'll take? Even when I try to not do what I think is the right number, even when I try to purposefully make it twice as long as that, it's like, no, I think I can have this done in 2-3 days when it's something I think I can do in an afternoon.
Right.
And then it ends up being longer than that. It's just crazy. It's really, really easy to underestimate how much work it really takes. And for something that large in terms of word count, that's just incredibly overwhelming. It's freaking crazy. So
that's wild.
That's interesting.
On that note, by the way, just in regards to the great amount of dialogue that had to be put in there, from what I understand, the way they went about it, they had to people dedicated solely to just putting the dialogue into Word documents and then transferring it over into the code. But because obviously there's so much of it, it took too long. So they had somebody on the team create this special tool specifically for the project just so they could transfer it all in there just so they can meet the deadlines.
That's crazy. Yeah. It sounds a little bit like, I can't remember, I think it was the Suikoden games, the translation process for that, where they would just dump this data file and nothing's in the right place or in order, and they're trying to play the game to get context for where that text is supposed to be.
Right. Because Japanese omits context a lot, and so it's not that easy to just translate.
So, when you have a document that huge, and you're trying to put that into digital, a digital format, digital code or whatever, to then be programmed into a different software. I mean, I'm sure that's a nightmare. Just the technicalities of we have the words here. How do we get them into that? Like,
and then multiply it by however many languages that the game supports.
Oh,
Yeah,
shoot.
exactly.
I didn't even think of that. What languages did this game ship in,
I don't know that, but I do, in this interview I was reading, I do remember him saying he had a lot of really, let's just call them, they weren't very fun talks with some executives about specifically that, about like the localization.
It's going to be
process
very expensive.
Because it was so expensive.
Yeah.
Because it cost so much money to do it. And it was not fun trying to convince them that it was necessary to have as much dialogue as they did, I guess.
Like, really, do we have to do this?
Yeah.
That's funny.
Crazy stuff.
Well, I want to bring up the music a little bit. So one of the difficulties with this game was, maybe it wasn't even a difficulty. There was a problem. I don't know what happened. I don't know what would cause a company to do this, unless maybe the original music was just not very good, is all I can think of. But I doubt it, because the artist, his name is Brian Williams, and does good work, generally speaking. Brian Williams was brought on to do the music for this game. And something happened really late, like in 1999, that he got fired. Like, the whole Black Isle decided, you're done, and we don't need your work, and you're fired, right? And he was pissed. He was extremely upset. They ended up hiring somebody named Mark Morgan. And if you look up on Wikipedia, it says Mark Morgan, music composed by Mark Morgan. But for the majority of the development, it was actually a different soundtrack that had already been written. It was already basically done. Brian Williams had finished the whole thing. And that's when they axed him and said, okay, we need somebody else to write music very quickly, by the way. Mark Morgan did not have a lot of time to make what ended up being the actual soundtrack for this game. But the reason I think that's important, at least to bring up initially, is because even within writing and game development, it's good if you have the music for your game done. It's good for the developers to listen to it. It's good for the writers to listen to it.
Yeah.
I don't know, if it's nailed down, like, this is the feel we want by Chris or something like that, this is what we want it to be, then people can kind of immerse themselves into that mood. You know, the music can create that atmosphere a little bit, and can really help with the whole process of development and all that stuff.
Sure.
But the way that they did it was the music was almost like the last thing to be done, because it was so late in the process that they fired the musician. That you almost can't have that, or if you did have that, you lost the special connection between the developers listening to the same music you're listening to while you're playing it.
Yeah.
That was not the case for this game. What do you think of the music, by the way?
I actually really like it.
Yeah, I did too.
I like it a lot. I think it's fantastic.
That flute, man. When there's an enemy nearby.
Battles.
Whoo!
Every time it's to inspire the same level of, oh man,
dang it.
Yeah.
Do I run or do I kill them?
Yeah, exactly. It's almost like an irritating sound.
Yeah.
But no, I think the music is genuinely pretty excellent. I was actually kind of surprised because it feels like it's like actually recorded with like an orchestra, like a lot of it.
Oh yeah.
And that was not what I expected from a game of this time. I mean, a lot of it was
just MIDI,
composed in MIDI, and they're using whatever sound card from the console or whatever to sort of like imitate the sounds that they want. But no, I mean, I guess it is a later game. It came out in 99, so that would have been around the time where you would have started seeing that more. But
they did have like voice acting and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you did have some real.
The sound is just in general really high quality for a game of its era, or I guess what it seems like the era is to me.
Well, this is why,
just by looking at it.
There's a reason for that, and the reason is PC Master Race. What you're describing to me is PC Master Race.
Yeah, probably.
Because this was during the N64 and the PS1, but like PC was making stuff like this, you know?
Sure.
Because this game, I believe, was initially developed for Windows.
Yeah.
And there you go.
Yeah. I mean, that's probably
ahead.
is the reason there's not, like the same kind of limits. But
right.
I don't know. The sound quality is just really good on the music.
Good.
It's excellent. I like it a lot.
Oh, did I mention that Guido is the cover of the game?
Oh, yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
So
right,
here's another fun part. Here's another wonderful, wonderful aspect of this game.
Is his face blue in real life too?
No, and neither was the makeup blue. That was
No.
it was maybe tinted, or they kind of did that in the effects a little bit later.
Yeah.
So they hired an actor to just be a model. Just here, we're going to put makeup on your face, and you're going to be a model, and we're going to take a photo of you. And like they, I guess, did this later in development. Maybe this should have been done sooner, but it was later. Somehow, the day of, the actor was like, "Oh, I got another job. I can't do it. I'm doing something else. Peace, bye," and he left. And they didn't have a model to be the face of the game, right? And Guido, he's an interesting guy. He's like a musician, right? He's a rock and roll kind of guy. He's got long hair. He looks grunge, you know, especially at the time, man. Like he was hardcore. And I don't know how the conversation went, but somehow it was decided, hey, you should be the one who's the face of this game, right? And he did not want to do it, really. But ultimately it was decided for him, I think, or in order to keep people happy, he decided to do it himself. But he underwent the makeup, which was actually kind of a whitish gray on his face. They did all the makeup on him, and then you see it. And it's so funny seeing his face there, because when I saw a picture of him before I knew that he was the face, I was like, he looks familiar. Where have I seen him before? And it turns out that is him on the cover of Planescape Torment. That is the producer of the game itself.
Right.
Wonderful stuff. I think that's just classic.
Well,
More companies should do this. Get your president and have him be the face of the game.
I thought it was really.
Sorry.
Oh, go ahead, Max.
Go ahead,
you go
Max.
first.
But I'm just wondering, like, can you imagine what the conversation must have been around the office after that guy died? It's like, okay, who here looks like they've died and been reborn 1,000
Right.
times?
That's exactly what I was thinking. Yeah.
Well,
Wait, can you help us out, bro?
This almost feeds into the concept that maybe they weren't like the best friends with him at the time. You know, that maybe they looked
Maybe
at him.
that's what caused it.
Right. And I hate to keep bringing that up, but you know, he said so himself, right?
Yeah.
He knew that he wasn't the most popular guy at the office.
Yeah.
And the fact that he got picked here, I think you're onto something, Max.
Well, it's also interesting too that this also kind of supports the whole point that they were trying to like be opposite on everything. And a lot of times you want your main character to be like a beautiful person.
Yeah,
and
totally.
they like purposefully made this guy like as jacked as
Just
possible. Right?
Really, yeah, absolutely.
And Chris even said that in the interview I was reading too, where he was like, that was one of the reasons why maybe this didn't we didn't market this the best that we could have, because
Instead,
like they just got this like really messed up dude's face like on the cover of the game. Like, yeah, this is supposed to be. I mean, like we talk about this all the time. Like we see the cover of Final Fantasy VII. You just like, oh, that's awesome. I want to play.
I want it because
like,
of that.
People look at the cover.
Prince of Persia 3.
Yeah, you look at the cover.
Yeah,
and you're like, that looks interesting.
Yeah.
The cover is like really important.
Yeah.
And they just like put like a cadaver almost like on the cover of their freaking game with like this blue skin. And it's just like, how many kids are going to pass that and be like, oh yeah, I want to play that.
Yeah, that screams like horror adult genre, basically.
Which is what they were going for. But
it is. But that's a smaller demographic than...
For sure.
Yeah.
Did you have something you were going to say there, Max?
Yeah, it's, well, in my original video, like, you're so right about the cover. That's how I did my, the beginning of my video, where I talked about, well, maybe this is why people didn't play that game as much, because not only do you have that, but it's also releasing at the same time as games like Pokemon Gold and Silver, System Shock 2, Dino Crisis, Crash Team Racing, and all those have pretty standout covers. And you're going to want to play one of those probably first before the end of the world happens. So,
YM2K, dude.
Right,
that's right.
December 1999. Do I want to spend the last minutes of my life playing as a guy who looks like he's about to die? No, I'm trying to turn my mind off of that. Let's go.
That's a good point. It's a really good point.
Oh, that's great.
And, you know, I mean,
that's right.
Kudos to them for, I guess, you know, staying strong on their concept of like, we don't want this to feel tropey or traditional in any sense. We're trying to do something
the tropes
totally
that make
different.
money.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I agree with that.
So, you know, it is what it is. And the game made a profit. It just wasn't a super huge profit, right?
Yeah, I think it was had a budget of $3 to $4 million, and it sold something like 400,000 copies. But there is an asterisk to that. A lot of those copies were copies that were sold when the game went on sale for a discounted rate, so it's not necessarily. Anyway, somehow the numbers didn't quite work out.
Kind of like Super Mario Brothers, which was like bundled with the NES.
Yeah, and how it's the best-selling game ever. Yeah,
50 million copies or something like that. But it's like not really.
Yeah, not really, not really. Big asterisk because Duck Hunt shipped
Duck
with
Hunt
it as well. So
yeah.
Duck Hunt is the best-selling game of all time.
Yeah, crazy.
And then I want to bring up this too, and then maybe we can talk about
the Planescape.
Sigil.
Oh,
and
Sigil.
Just it's an interesting intro to that this world here. But have you played or even heard of a game called Numenera or Numenera?
I've heard of it. That's the new Planescape game, right? The one that came out like was kickstarted or something like that.
Yeah. And Max, have you played that?
No, I haven't. But no, it's from what I understand, it takes place within the same universe, but just a different character.
A ton of the developers from this game went to work on that game. In fact, after this game, they all kind of split up and they talked about trying to do something, get the old gang back together and, make a killer game again. And it took about 20 years. But in 2017, which is the same year that the remaster of Planescape Torment itself was released. Yeah, the Enhanced Edition came out. That same year, this game came out called Numenera. And it is a ton of the people, even Chris Avalon did some writing. He wasn't like a high supervisor or anything. But he did, lend his talents to the project. A bunch of the old team got back together and made that game. And it's a game that I have not played yet, but I would imagine it's awesome.
Yeah. I mean, I at the time that I remember even hearing about that project, I didn't know it was connected to this. I just knew it was a Kickstarted game and some old developers from an old project got back together. That was about the extent. So I actually don't know much about it at all outside of the fact that it's Planescape universe and the same guys made it. But I don't know how it was received. I don't know.
I actually don't know much about it either.
Yeah. But I would imagine it must have been at least decent with like that group of guys coming back to do it again.
If any other than the fact that gaming has surpassed, I don't want to say surpassed. That's not correct. Gaming has passed by the 90s, but has still yet to surpass it. How about that? Anybody in the comments who's played Numenera, please let us know what you think of that game and whether or not it stacks up to Planescape Torment,
or whether it's worthy of
even being mentioned in this episode.
Consideration of a podcast in the future or whatever.
Yeah, there you go. That'd be great.
I am interested in trying it now that we just, played this game and everything, but don't know much about it other than that. So,
all right.
Max, I want to pass it to you here for a minute to talk a little bit about, I mean, if you have notes on it and whatnot, the Planescape universe itself. Maybe even divorced from this project, but like kind of setting up the world that we're about to enter into, right? Like I think it's actually kind of important to have some knowledge of it before you come into this, because you can feel very, very lost in this game for a myriad of reasons.
Yeah.
And so I think it is nice to understand the world a little bit. And the fact that it's actually much bigger than what you're actually going to see in this game, like way, way bigger than this.
Almost, infinitely bigger. Yeah, technically.
Yeah, and if you have played Baldur's Gate 3, the Gith, right, like that race, there's a lot of great stuff from that, like the sort of history or how this race came to be, right? That is the character Dakon. Obviously, you learn a lot from him there. Anyway, I want to pass it to you and just kind of see if maybe you can set us a little bit of a foundation for what people are about to get involved in here.
Okay, so I'll do my best to recall everything that I did in my original video. So the primary thing that people need to know is that the entire world of Planescape is essentially constructed from belief of all the different creatures that exist in the cosmos, and all those planes are constructed according to an alignment chart. So there's good and there's evil, and there's chaos and there's order, and then there's neutral in the middle of them. Now, depending on the person you are, maybe you're a good, ordered person, and you believe in the highest good and you try to lead the best life possible. If when you die, you will go to one of the heavens or hells or purgatories that exist in the Planescape setting. If you're good and ordered, you will go to the highest heaven, which I believe is called Elysium. I can't remember exactly what the lowest hell was, but chaotic evil, that's where you're going to go.
Gotcha.
Now, as for the way that, everything is structured, sorry, go ahead.
Bator? Is that the name of it? Bator?
Is it
that where he
Bator?
goes?
I know Bator is one of them, but I couldn't remember.
Is that not the lowest one? Where do they fight the Blood War? I forget the name of that plane.
Well, that's where. Well, never mind.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't remember off the top of my head.
Anywho, I'll delete.
There's also Celestia. I know that that's one of the higher ones, but I don't.
Sounds like it.
Remember again, like there's a lot of this stuff on the periphery that they don't even necessarily. I mean, I'm sure there's a character that explains it somewhere, but
maybe
there's a lot of stuff you can miss, and it's a really fascinating setting. Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah. So from what I recall, there was either 16 or 17 heavens, hells, and purgatories, and you need to imagine them as if they exist along a wheel. So at the very top of the wheel would be the aforementioned Elysium, the highest heaven. That's where you go if you're good or ordered. And at the very bottom is the lowest hell. And then on left and right are the chaotic purgatory and the ordered purgatory. So wherever you are on that alignment, you're going to go to one of these different heavens or hells. Now, for the most part of the Planescape Torment game, you don't go to any of these places except for Bator and Cursed. I believe those are the two, and you don't go to any of the other ones. Now you might be asking, well, why is that? Like, if it's called Planescape, why aren't you going to any of these places? At the very center of this cosmology, of this wheel, is this giant spire that juts up infinitely, and I mean infinitely, that's what it says in the lore, into the cosmos. And right at the top of this spire is this ring that sort of sits at the very top of the spire, and it's like this circle that is somehow hovering there. It doesn't really make a whole lot of sense from, well, I mean, it's a fantasy setting, so just go with it. But it's a big circle, and that is the main setting of the Planescape Torment game. It's a place called Sigil or Sigil. Well, I don't know. We'll just go with both. And then this is sort of the meeting place for where all these people from all these beings from all these different heavens and hells and purgatories meet. And so it's like the most cosmopolitan place in the galaxy, right? Everybody is congregated here, and you're going to meet a whole bunch of like just people of varying types of morality and different ways of life, different systems of belief, different philosophies on how to live, which is kind of paradoxical because they're already dead, but you know what I mean? Right. So yeah, that's the general setting. I don't think I missed anything there.
Very nice.
It's kind of what's the name of the shape in geometry? Anyway, like a bagel or like a donut shape.
Yes.
Kind of ring.
A torus.
A torus, I think is what it's called. Yeah. Because that kind of sits atop this infinite spire. Which of
like
course,
a halo.
Yeah. I mean, like anytime I've seen like concept art of it, obviously you can't draw something infinite. They just have to draw a really tall spire with a thing at the top.
Yeah, I've seen it
too. But
yeah.
I love conceptually the idea of an infinite tower, and at the top of infinity,
yes,
like it really sets the stage for what this universe is. It's like you are in planes that are ruled by like different gods.
Yeah,
and the Lady of Pain happens to be the goddess of Sigil.
Yeah,
right?
Lady of Pain. Yeah,
yeah. And so like this is sort of a concept that like mortal minds can't grasp. A circle or a torus that sits at the top of an infinite tower where this lady rules in this sort of true neutrality, this place of true neutrality that is at the center of this wheel, as Max was saying. But you can also think of it like the tavern of the universe where people from all sorts of different places sort of congregate on their travels to other places, right? So it's
because
like
you can only get there through a portal.
Yes.
You can't it's infinity away. You can't just go there. You have to have a key and go through a portal in order to be there in the first place.
Right.
And some people accidentally go through a portal, not knowing that they have a key, and end up in Sigil and don't know how to get
out of it.
Yeah, that's a thing that happens.
It's they call it the city of many doors or something like that, right? Because doors are the portals you're talking about, the gates. And it basically connects to the rest of the multiverse. It all kind of like goes outward from here.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And there's a bunch of different planes, right? But I heard this, like, I heard somebody talking about this. I read it recently. It was saying that the planes are all infinite because they're all universes. It's a multiverse, right?
Yeah.
So Sigil is infinity away from the other universes, which are also infinity big.
Yeah.
So there is a paradox here. There's a total paradox here, and they know it. The creator of all this stuff, he knows it. He did this on purpose.
Yeah,
like this is
You
meant to
see
be.
why it took them so long to make the game in the first place.
Yeah,
Exactly. Like,
seriously.
what do we do with this? but the Lady of Pain has some rules.
Yeah.
There is no war in Sigil.
Right.
Sigil itself cannot be destroyed, no matter how much the people who live there may want it to be. And there are no other gods allowed in Sigil. Those are the rules of Sigil, basically. And it sounds like purgatory to me.
Yeah,
in a way.
it's
because it's neutral, right?
If we're looking at the highest heaven and the lowest hell, and anything between those two is a sort of different degree of purgatory.
Dante, yeah.
Yeah, this would be like the direct center purgatory.
Dante level 5
Right.
of Dante's Purgatorium level 5.
Sure. So it's an absolutely fascinating setting, and like I said, you don't even really see a ton of it in this game. I think you go to, what is it, like 4 planes total or something like that.
Yeah.
And you spend most of your time in Sigil. I
Just
mean,
in Sigil.
85% of the game is there. And then at the end, you kind of like jump to a couple different ones for a very brief time.
Maybe they had to.
Yeah, but
Oh, what's his name? Who's that? Zeb. Zeb was like, "Come on, man,
you gotta
use one of the universes I made."
Sure. Anyway, but there's a lot to kind of look into there, and the game will certainly explain a lot of its lore. I think, particularly by the time you get to the Clerk's Ward, I think where like the Sensates are at.
Oh yeah.
There's a lot of stuff explained there about the planes and blood wars and gods and belief and all these things. But a lot of this is going to kind of play into, I think, the analysis that we're going to do. Yeah. I think what Max mentioned about belief being like sort of the cornerstone of how this universe exists. And the fact that, I mean, I don't necessarily want to spoil anything here, but belief is so powerful that certain planes can shift their alignment if the people there all begin to believe
that's cool
in a certain way. So these aren't like fixed.
That's cool.
These are not fixed planes by any means.
So
as the alignment of the people of that plane shift, the plane itself also shifts.
Very interesting.
So nothing is like fixed necessarily. So it's awesome. It's a really cool fantasy setting, a very unique fantasy setting, and very unlike any that I've seen outside of it. And I think they capture it very well. They give you a very small piece of it in this game, but there's a lot more material. Obviously, there's a whole game book and which uses the D&D rule set that people can make campaigns in and read about all the different planes and characters and gods.
It's got characters as well.
Yeah.
This was one of the deliberate choices by Chris, is to not use any of the characters that Zeb made. I think some of them can be found within the game, but they're NPCs. They're not playable characters because, well, spoiler alert a little bit, people can die in this game.
No,
I think we said that earlier. No spoiler alert. Your party can die. People can die. And it would affect kind of the lore that Zeb had kind of made for all of this stuff. And I don't think Chris necessarily wanted the baggage that came with the pre-made characters to kind of come along. He wanted to have his own original characters. So he uses the world, but not the characters. But there are specific characters who were created and who inhabit the Planescape, and most of whom do not appear in this game.
Yeah. So I'm looking forward to it. Anything else that you guys have before we kind of wrap up this episode?
Basically hit all my notes.
Anything from you?
No, that's pretty much everything, man.
Okay,
Awesome.
Great. So here's the plan. We are going to be covering in the next episode all the way up until you leave the hive. So there are many different areas inside of Sigil, but the hive is like the opening sort of like slum area that you start the game in.
Right.
There's several different like maps within that hive, but there's a lot of stuff that goes on there. So it's kind of a lot of ground to cover.
Yeah.
It kind of is and isn't. Like, it depends on how you play it and how much you explore it and how many quests you decide to do and how many characters you talk to. But we're going to be covering all the way up until the point where you leave the hive.
Perfect.
Up to I think it's the lower ward.
By the way, Escape from the Hive is not a game from the 80s.
Oh.
I listened to the track 100 times from Il Mitch the other day. It's Skater of the Hive. But his accent made it sound like Escape from the Hive, Escape the Hive. Oh, that was a great game. So, Skater of the Hive or something like that.
Totally different.
Totally different game.
Escape from the Hive.
Not Escape from the Hive.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
Il Mitch, by the way.
Good correction.
Check
Everyone should listen to Il Mitch.
It's up on like Bandcamp.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, just for free. You can just go listen to it.
All right, everybody. So that's where you need to play up to for next time. That's what we're going to be covering. And we will see you then. Have a good week. Peace out.
Peace.